Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar on hybrid working. My name's Esther Carter and I'll be chairing today's session. Many of you know us well already because I've seen lots of the names on the delegate list, but for the few of those that don't know us so well, we're leading accountants and advisors to the media and marketing services industry, working right across sort of the marketing services, advertising, design industry, film, TV, theatre, and media tech and creative tech sectors. And our clients range right from startups right through to sort of private equity backed groups and multinational companies and some AIM listed groups. We're part of Morkinson Smith, which is a top 15 accountancy and advisory firm, and that in turn is part of More Global, which is an international network with presence in over 100 different countries. So we're very well positioned to help our clients with their international expansion. So, I mean, most of my media and marketing services clients, shifted to a work from home model when lockdown started. And more latterly, sort of business owners have been gradually encouraging people to come back to the workplace. And there seems to be a real mixture, to be honest, between those staff very keen to get back and those a bit more reluctant to go back, often enjoying the lack of commute and the extra family time that brings with them. And what a lot of my clients have said is often that's sort of linked to their generation and family situation. And there's also quite a mixture of opinions for employers as well, in terms of how things should work in the longer term. In a survey that we did earlier this year, the general consensus was some sort of 2-3-3-2 mixture of working from home. But I mean, I think generally speaking, most of my clients and the sort of the wider business world in general has muddled through the last sort of 16, 17 months pretty well, with this makeshift situation. But obviously, if this is going to be a much longer term model, then there are lots of considerations as to what sort of procedures and formalities and paperwork need to be put in place. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Hopefully we're going to be answering some of those questions. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers, Jessica Wallace and Amy Cretton, this morning. Just to give you a little bit about each of them, Jessica's an HR consultant at Morkinson Smith HR Consulting. She works predominantly with businesses across the media and marketing services sector, and designs and implements bespoke projects for clients to enable them to get the most from their people. And this includes things like raising levels of performance and productivity, driving employee engagement and motivation, and helping shape management, training and reward structures. Amy is a strategic HR partner within Morkinson Smith HR Consulting, and again works with many media and marketing services businesses, and has been a real familiar face actually in many of the webinars that we've done and put on throughout the whole of the pandemic. So I'm sure many of you will recognise her. And Amy's got extensive experience working on the design and implementation of large sort of restructures, complex employee relations cases, management training programs, and implementation of new benefits platforms, and generally sort of the design of overarching HR strategies. So I'm going to hand over to Jessica and Amy to take us through some slides. Then I'll be asking them a few questions, but there will be plenty of opportunities for you to ask questions as well. So please do put those questions into the Q&A function, not the chat function, please, the Q&A function. They're much easier to manage there. And then I will put those to Jessica and Amy later on. So I think I'm handing over to you, Jessica, first.
Thank you. So we've got a few slides to share just to start with. So to start, it's quite useful to look at exactly what hybrid working is replacing in order for us to understand exactly what it is. So historically, to work flexibly, we've had a number of different options, which were flexible working, which is where an employee makes a formal request, usually in writing, to permanently alter their working hours, their days, their working pattern, or their working location. Or there's agile working, which is where a workforce encourages its people to work where, when, and how they choose. There's home working, which obviously is where an employee solely carries out their role from home. or remote working, where an employee carries out their role from a location or different locations of their choice. So now we have the new hybrid working, which essentially is a combination of all these different approaches towards flexible working. And it's really unlikely that it would have developed had it not been for the surprisingly effective remote working periods that were enforced during 2020 and early 21 lockdowns.
Before we carry on, we thought it'd be interesting to hear your views. So I'm going to put a poll up. Let's hope this works. So you should now see something on your screen. So what complications do you envisage while implementing a new hybrid working structure? A drop in productivity, disengaged staff, lack of team dynamics and spirits, unsuitable home working setup or environment, lack of on-the-job training or learning by osmosis, employee wellbeing being negatively affected, namely those who live alone. So if you could just start filling those out, and then I will share the results. People are still voting, so I'll give it a couple more minutes or a few more seconds. Okay, so if I share this then. So the majority of people are worried about lack of team dynamics and spirit, closely followed by learning by osmosis, and then, but all of them have been chosen at points. So drop in productivity, disengaged staff, unsuitable home working environments and setup, and employee wellbeing being negatively affected. So it's interesting that actually everyone's worried about a lot of things, but those two things, the lack of team dynamics and spirit and the lack of learning by osmosis, are quite key.
Okay, so things looked really different before the pandemic. So recent statistics about how this has affected the way that we work show that a year on from the first lockdown, 60% of us have remained working from home. 26% of us plan to continue working from home, either permanently or occasionally after all of the government restrictions ease. And prior to the 2020 lockdowns, there was only 6% of these people who worked from home for their main job. And even looking back to 10 years ago, only 884,000 people in the whole of the UK worked from home. So if we also look at the past of flexible working requests, historically, employers have had to raise formal flexible working requests in order to achieve a more flexible approach to working, which to date have been quite restrictive. So 6% may seem like a really small percentage, but prior to 2014, flexible working requests were only available to those who had children under the age of 5 years old. And even in current employment legislation, it sets out that employees must have 26 weeks continuous service in order to make a request to work flexibly. And they can only make one request in every 12-month period. So even for those who are eligible to submit a flexible working request, there's absolutely no guarantee that it will be accepted. And there's a number of valid business reasons for businesses to rely on in order to reject flexible working requests. So considering all of that, a hybrid working is therefore likely to be one of the biggest movements in flexible working arrangements that UK workers have seen in a really long time. So looking at how to identify exactly what's going to work for your business. So you can implement a new hybrid working structure just by issuing one new standalone policy. But if you do, it might not roll out very smoothly. So to ensure that hybrid working is successfully rolled out, employers will need to plan really carefully, tailoring their plans to ensure that they consider only what's relevant to the business and also their people. So given the scale of this change, there's many areas for consideration that employers tend to miss, but will actually be crucial and key to them helping shape their new personalised hybrid working plans. So examples of this are looking at areas like staff consultation, updating employee terms and conditions, gaining staff input and feedback, health, safety and DSE while those are working from home, employee wellbeing and updating your current plan accordingly to suit remote working and home working. Looking at training and employee development, your management team, maintaining employee engagement will be a big one, and of course compliance. So preventing any potential issues before they arise will be another really important key factor to the successful implementation of hybrid working. So therefore, it's going to be really important to plan carefully and in advance to launching your new plan, ensuring that you're tailoring your new working structure to your business and the work that needs to be carried out, and of course to your people. So considering any pitfalls will be really important, especially if there were any that you identified early on during the 2020 and early 21 lockdowns. So what didn't go so well and why, and how can that be resolved moving forwards? And talking to your staff. So getting staff input and feedback will ensure that you gain employee buy-in before implementing any permanent changes, which in turn can be key to your new hybrid structure being successful. So if the new structure is put together to accommodate employee input and feedback during those planning stages, then there's much less likely to be any complaints or concerns raised after the launch. And we'd always recommend that you update your management team's training. So updated training for your management team, it can ensure that not only are they familiar with the new hybrid working structure and their own expectations, but it will ensure that management skills and style are brought in line with how to effectively manage and support their teams remotely. So this change to management style can also be crucial to reducing the risk of employees feeling micromanaged while working from home.
So what we thought would be quite interesting is if we shared with you some of the questions that we've been getting from our clients since they've adopted a more hybrid working approach. And we thought we'd share their questions and give you some answers around what type of thing we've advised, what type of thing we've talked them through, and what considerations they've had when it comes to hybrid working. So the first one here is we had a client contact us and say that they've got their workforce is split. So some people are able to work from home and some people have to be either physically present in the office or they're client facing. So they're out on site a lot of the time and therefore can't work from home. And it appears to be causing a divide between the employee groups, and it's building, and now resentment is building. And they wanted to know if there's anything that they can do to help improve things, help remove that resentment, and perhaps if there was anything they should be doing for those people that can't now work from home. And it's an interesting one because there are things that you consider. So you might want to incentivize those people that can't work from home. You might want to look at how you can perhaps make their work-life balance just as good as those people that are working from home. The two things that will cause issues is work-life balance and then travel costs. So it might be that you want to make it so that no employee has any travel costs to fork out for while they're employed by your business. But it's not something that you have to do. So you don't have to incentivize those people that can't work from home. Everyone has a contract of employment and everyone has terms and conditions that they have to work towards. And everyone's terms and conditions are different. And if it's the nature of the job and it is that job that they're client facing, so they can't have this time at home, or it's that they physically don't have the setup at home, so they don't have a working space that's safe for them to work at home, or they are required in the office, that's not a problem, but I think it's really important to preempt it. So when you're launching this, consider those questions before they're asked so that you can go into that launch with all of the answers that probably will be asked to you before you start, so that the people that can't work from home already know, oh, they've considered it already, they've thought about it, I've not been forgotten. I think that's really important.
So another client raised that when working permanently in the office, they had a very close-knit team, but working from home, the team spirit and the communication seems to have dropped, and how do they get this back? So looking at the key differences would be a good place to start here. So what worked well when you were in the office compared to what's now not working so well from home? So it could be a number of different things. Is it that communication has dropped off? If it's something like that, then you could look to just arrange daily team catch-ups via video call, so the team is still seeing each other, so that they're still in regular contact with each other throughout the working week. Alternatively, it could be something like a lack of spontaneous and social interaction. So if so, look to arrange more social team events and things that focus on more than just the usual workload. So if that can't be done face-to-face, then you can always arrange virtual meetings and something really simple, just like quizzes and games, just to keep up that team spirit throughout the week when they're not seeing each other. And managers should be seen to promote things like virtual coffee breaks and catching up with their colleagues. So it's a really good idea for managers to lead by example there and really promote that employees should be taking that break throughout the working week to speak to people and keep up that social interaction. And as things open up and employees are back out and about on client sites, it's going to be a lot harder to keep those type of communications regular. So structuring these things can really help.
Another question was around management. So a client spoke to us and said they feel that while managing remotely, there may be some people in the team that aren't pulling their weight, and that others, and the manager that we spoke to, are finding this very difficult to monitor while they're not obviously physically present. So what are our tips for effectively monitoring productivity remotely? Managing people remotely is hard. It's so different compared to managing someone in the office. Obviously, when you're in the office, you can see people, they're visible. You can see that they're working on tasks. You can see what they're doing. You can see if they're busy. This doesn't actually always mean that they are busy. They could be emailing, they could be on instant messenger, they could be shopping, but they appear busy. And so you feel better as a line manager. When someone's working from home, you don't have that visibility. And so it's really difficult to be able to let that go. And it can be very, very tempting to micromanage. But actually, it's about looking at it from another perspective. So whereas before, when you're in the office, you look at tasks and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, when you're working from home or when it's a hybrid working environment, you tend to focus on output. So we always work to objectives when we're talking about appraisals or performance reviews or anything like that, but they tend to be long-term, so 6 monthly or 12 monthly. If you start setting short-term objectives and deadlines, you then don't have to call that person every single day to say, how are you getting on with this? Where are you with this? What are you up to today? It's more about waiting for them to come to you and say, oh, this needed to be done by Friday. It's done. It's in this folder. I've given it to the client. Let me know what you need me to do. It's also about trust. So you need to be able to trust your employees that they will do what they're saying they're doing to a high standard. You need to be able to trust that they will come to you if they're struggling with anything. And they need to be able to trust that they can come to you if they're struggling with anything and that you'll be approachable as a manager. And if that trust isn't there, then it's really important to build that trust and work on that working relationship, because otherwise managing someone remotely would be very, very difficult to do. But it does become about outputs as opposed to task-driven management.
So another thing we've had raised a few times is employees struggling to hold team meetings remotely. So there's been a number of employees that have joined like Zoom meetings or Teams meetings, but refuse to turn on their video cameras and handle meetings those ways. So our recommendation would be with these kind of issues to manage it exactly how you would have within the office environment. So you'd typically address this quite sensitively, make sure that you try to understand the individual's concerns and their own personal circumstances. So try to understand that for some people, it could actually be something as simple as them just being embarrassed to share their home environment with their colleagues. If they have concerns of this nature, you can always do something as simple as just taking them through the different video options that are now available, such as like blurring your background. And a good idea is just to address it with them as informally as possible to begin with, so that you can both discuss it openly and honestly and come to a mutual agreement. We've also had it raised that with some employees choosing to return to the office and others working from home, there's concern around cliques forming and how to resolve this and stop that divide happening. So in this circumstance, it would be good to look to organise set collaboration days where the whole team is required to go into the office on the same day and all meet face to face. This will keep team dynamics and spirit going and ensure that the whole team is still communicating with each other and not just those that they choose to. If you have regular team meetings in your diary, look to make these face-to-face in order to maintain the team's social interaction. And additionally, if you've got employees who are all due to be in the same meeting, it's a good idea to promote them booking into either a meeting room or a boardroom all together within the office space, so that that face-to-face interaction is still being maintained and business relationships continue to build. And if face-to-face collaboration days, they're not happening as often as you'd like, then you can always try to plan social events so that the team can continue to team build. We have a lot of questions about exactly what the employer should be setting when they're looking to implement their new hybrid working structure. So there's no black and white answer to this. It completely depends on you and your business, the nature of the work that needs to be completed, and your employees. So if the majority of your employees need to spend a significant time physically present in the office and to carry out their work, then you may want to consider setting a very structured pattern for your hybrid working. So you could set something like 2 days at home per week and 3 days they're required to actually be physically present in the office. But if the majority of your employees have quite a flexible workload and that they can do remotely and successfully, then you don't need to set a pattern, and you can leave this completely up to employee discretion. Alternatively, there's some employees that choose to set expectations only. For example, with like employees to try and make it into the office just once or twice a week just to maintain relationships. But whichever structure you do decide on, it will need to be tailored to what works best for you. So just remember to plan in advance and to gain staff feedback as to what their preferences may be, and consider what's worked well to date. So another one we've had raised is where employees, now that they know that they're able to work remotely, they want to move location permanently, and employers want to understand, do they have to allow this? So the answer would be only if it will not restrict them carrying out their usual role. So if they can predominantly work from home or remotely, and to date that's proven successful, then of course it can be allowed. But you're likely to need to make that conditional on the expectation that they are actually available to attend certain meetings or events. So, for example, they'd have to travel back to attend the office once per month for a regular team meeting. If they work remotely without ever attending face-to-face team meetings or being physically present, then they're much more likely to become isolated from the rest of the team. And in this case, an important consideration would be their performance. So if there are already existing concerns over their productivity levels while they're working away from the office environment, then that's only likely to worsen over the amount of time that they're actually away from the team and from management and from the office.
So we also got a lot of questions recently around recruitment. So lots of people have started to recruit, and now we're looking to recruit remotely. And during 2020 and for the beginning of 2021, there was no option but to interview remotely. But now we're moving to a stage where people are wondering whether they continue to adopt that practice or whether they move back to more face-to-face interviews. And there's positives and negatives of both. So when you're interviewing remotely, for the candidate and the interviewing manager, it's quite difficult because usually you would bounce off of body language, and you would, from meeting them face-to-face at the door and then walking to them to the meeting room, you tend to have that 2 minutes chat that just sets the scene, and you instantly gel with someone or you don't. When someone joins an interview on Teams or Zoom, they join the interview, their face pops up and it's almost straight into business, and you don't have that body language there to be able to bounce off of. So it's a big struggle to understand whether or not they're going to be a team fit, I think, a lot of the time. So interviewing itself can be a lot harder, but it does encourage diversity and inclusion. So people that perhaps would not have been able to be in the office or be in the city 5 days a week, for example, now because it's looking likely that it would be 2 days a week, that might be more viable for them. So for example, if you're thinking about a mother with kids, she might be more likely to be able to attend the office 2 days a week than 5 days a week. So it does open up opportunities that previously weren't available to people. It's not just about interviewing, though, it is also about the onboarding process and what comes next. So usually onboarding processes tend to be quite task driven. But now it's, again, going back to that whole output thing, it's about making that onboarding process a bit more structured and to be focused on outputs and what people need to achieve by certain points in their onboarding process. But it also throws up lots of different questions. So will someone really be able to become integrated in the team, in the business, and really understand what they need to do for the company within the first 3 months if they're half the time working from home or working remotely? So do you have people office-based for the first 3 months of their role? And if they're office-based for the first 3 months of their role, do you need to buddy them up? And does someone else need to be office-based for those months as well? Because if they're in the office on their own, it's just they might as well be at home on their own. So it's really interesting to think about how it's going to affect not only the recruitment, but also the onboarding in the first 3 to 6 months of an employee's working life at the company. And I think there's lots of things to consider, and there is no, unfortunately, right answer. It's not black and white. It's just going to be about what works for different organizations. And I think that's really important to consider all the potential issues before you decide on what recruitment process you follow.
Thank you both very much. So I have a few questions to ask you. We've started to get a couple of questions through from the audience, but please do put more questions through as we go. So, I mean, from the clients that you've worked with, I mean, have you, or rather have they, I suppose, seen absences increase when people have moved to a more hybrid working model?
No, we've actually found that it's decreased. So it's different when you're working in a hybrid structure. Usually if you're working 5 days a week in the office and you think about when you're feeling ill, you usually feel at your worst first thing in the morning when you wake up. So at this point, you've still got to get ready, you've still got to commute, you've still got to spend the day away from your home and from any home comfort. So you're much more likely to make a quick decision first thing in the morning and call in sick for the rest of the day. But alternatively, I mean, if you're able to work from home, you're much more likely to, you know, go back to bed, have a bit more of a lay-in, see how you feel, open the laptop a lot closer to your starting time and just see how you get on throughout the morning. So people are more likely to try working when they're not feeling 100%. There's issues associated with that, being that there's no one there from work to check in on you, to see how you are throughout the day. Even in the case that there is, say for instance, if you've had a video call with your line manager that morning, they're less likely to notice if you do deteriorate during the day. Whereas if you're in the office, your manager's likely to notice that you're not feeling too great and send you home. So yeah, so it's important therefore that if employees do continue to work through genuine illness at home, that employees remember that could actually have a negative impact on both their well-being and even possibly the quality of their work. So they should really be promoting that for both those working from home and in the office, that they should still be taking time off as usual during genuine bouts of sickness.
Yeah, I think that is a worry, isn't it? Because that is the certainly me being off sick always used to mean working from home. I never actually stopped completely working. But yeah, certainly people should be encouraged to take the time out to actually properly recover if they're ill. And what about sort of recognising when employees become disengaged if they're working from home? Because this must be quite difficult to spot.
Yeah, so there's probably key signs to look out for. So it's more likely to be someone that is keeping really quiet during team conversations. They're not involving themselves socially with the rest of the team. They're probably much less likely to participate in any meetings or conversations even that are around the future of the business or even their employment, and just really focusing on the here and now. They're much less likely to be as available as they used to be. So you'll probably notice certain changes in their behaviour or even their attitude. But it would be important in that case that managers keep up that regular communication and one-to-one meetings with those employees. Otherwise, the worst case scenario is that resignations will suddenly start coming in as a shock. But I think in that case, it's important that the managers promote socialising or events, especially with the team. So having a good team and colleagues is what retains a lot of employees in their role. So if they're working remotely a lot of the time and they're not so invested in the team and those relationships, they won't be as strong. So they won't be as invested in it. It would make them easier to resign.
Thank you. We've got quite a few questions coming in now, so I might dive into some of those. I'll just let everybody know actually that the slides will be available for everybody that either attended this session or missed this session later on. So that was one of the questions. And somebody said, so we're adopting a hybrid model of 3 days at home and 2 days in the office. Do we need to update contracts of employment to change their work location, or can we still actually just keep the location as the office location to allow for future flexibility in any changing requirements that we might have?
Yeah, you can keep it as the office location. That's not a problem. The only thing I'd say is if after so many months of adopting certain models, so if everyone works from home 3 days a week, for example, after a few months, this will become an implied term anyway. So if you ever did want to remove that, it's still contractual. So it's just important. You can, but sometimes it's better to make it prescriptive, because then you know where you stand and everyone knows what the expectations are.
I mean, actually, one of the questions I had was around sort of the more general compliance needs. I mean, Jessica or Amy, are there any other sort of compliance needs that you need to think about if you're moving to a more sort of long-term hybrid model?
Well, as hybrid working is still so new, there's no employment legislation as such that is currently in place. But I mean, that being said, compliance will be key to ensuring that the new plan is successfully rolled out. I think, as we've covered today, there is more to it than issuing just one simple policy. You'll need to be aware in advance of all the ifs and buts. Were there teething problems during the lockdowns that should be considered? A really important part of it will be if employees have raised any concerns or even objections that need to be resolved prior to implementing any documentation. So a good idea would be something along the lines of a management guide, so that everybody is aware of their expectations and what they are. And employees should be kept up to date with really regular communication around, you know, the business's plans and their intentions.
I think you've got a Esther, we can't hear you. You seem to be muted.
Yeah, I'm back. One, I think I was coughing, and so I muted it. So another sort of related question to that. So one said, if we've got no office at the moment, which actually, you know, is the case with some of my clients, where they were lucky enough to come up with sort of an end of lease or break clause, and so they just sort of ditched the office completely, but that this particular person's planning to eventually return later in the year, maybe, to an office environment. They've asked, are there any sort of legal watch outs with staff contracts that are still drafted pre-pandemic for a central London location? And also, when the government removed the restrictions from working from home, are staff then entitled to expenses if they continue to work from home? Because effectively then the employer is using that employee's home as their office.
Yeah, so if someone's working from home, it's their home location on their contract, they can claim the expenses, the tax breaks from the government. That's fine, but they can also potentially claim expenses to travel into an office. So if you put someone's home location on their contract and then you have an office later in the year and you don't amend their contract, any travel that they do between their home location and the office, they could potentially expense back to the company. So it's important to remember. If you don't have an office yet, what we've been saying to people, because a lot of our clients are in a similar position, and we've been saying to people, as long as you can pinpoint a location within London that you're likely to be within, so whether it's zone 1 or zones 1 and 2, if you put the zones in there and you put something in the contract that says you are required, your dual location is home-based and office-based. Currently, there is no office location. However, it's likely that by the end of the year, the office will be located within. And then as long as you can pinpoint an area, we can't just say London, unfortunately, because London's huge and that won't hold any weight, but if you're quite confident that they will be within a certain area, then we can make it quite specific in that way.
Somebody here is saying that I think it's absolutely right that staff are kind of concerned about the announcement that the government will make on Monday, and they're concerned that sort of, you know, all the brakes are suddenly coming off really quickly. Obviously, there's a lot about it in the press, and this sort of person sort of commenting they think it's affecting people's enthusiasm for returning, because it's as if all of a sudden things are just going to go back to normal, and people just got so used to working from home in a flexible way, and how can sort of employers deal with maybe some of the anxiety and concerns that causes.
I think it's all about reassurance. There is going to be anxiety. There is definitely going to be panic. It seems to have happened very suddenly, doesn't it? And as of the 19th of July, if that is Freedom Day, as they keep calling it, they've already said that they'll be removing the need to work from home. And so that is probably causing a lot of employees to think, that means I'm going to have to go back to the office again and I'm not ready. I think it's all about reassurance. So, you know, if your building has been open for this period, there must have been, you know, measures in place to be COVID secure up until this point. It's about letting your employees know that those measures are still going to be in place. You're not going to, the government may be removing everything, but you're not going to be. So it's important to remember that they are still your priority and you're still looking after their well-being. Talk to them about what it is that concerns them, because it might be something really simple that they think everyone's got to be squashed into the office again, and you can then let them know that actually no, there will still be gaps between desks, or there'll still be social distancing. Find out from them exactly what it is and then go from there, because guessing isn't going to help you, because you might be working on something, or you might be working towards something that actually that's not what's causing panic, or that's not what people are anxious about. So communication with your staff and getting feedback is really important to be able to then work towards that and work towards what it is that people are feeling anxious about. But yeah, there is going to be panic, I'm sure of it. And it's down to the employers, I guess. If you absolutely need everyone back into the office, you can put them back into the office, but it might cause issues. So it's just about talking to your staff and finding out what the concerns are and going from there.
I mean, obviously we don't know what Boris is going to say on Monday, but if he does indeed kind of just, you know, all bets are off, you know, social distancing rules are out the window, no one has to wear face masks anymore, you know, I suspect that will cause a great deal of anxiety for a lot of people. But presumably employers can implement their own rules, so they can still implement social distancing rules. And could they still sort of say people, well, you won't wear face masks in the office, but they could still have the gaps between the desks,
yep,
and have social distancing rules just to make people feel a little bit more comfortable if they want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, a good question here is, should we require people to take COVID tests before they come into the office? Should it be mandatory or voluntary?
So you can implement that. You can say to people that before they come into the office, they have to take a COVID test and they have to be able to demonstrate that it's negative. If they refuse to take a COVID test, you can't force them. You can't force them to. So you have to be prepared that if they say we're not taking a COVID test, that they're going to continue working from home. So tests a bit easier. Vaccinations is, I would strongly suggest not asking people if they're vaccinated, because that takes you into the realms of potential discrimination for philosophical belief, or disability if they can't have a vaccination because of certain disabilities that they have. So vaccinations are slightly more on the risk side, so I would err on the side of caution and not ask about those. But COVID tests, if you're prepared for them to refuse and not come into the office, then you can. I think most people at the moment are encouraging it rather than making it mandatory.
There was a simple question we had earlier on actually about the stats on the first slide about the working from home rates and where they came from.
That came from the CIPD, so we can publish the link on the slides before we send them out again.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Another question coming here. So pre-pandemic, we used to work in an office and often around a central table, and our managers would often just ask questions across the table. Now that we're working remotely, this hasn't turned into ad hoc video calls every time something jumps into their head. Do you have any ideas for managing this, and I suppose creating a similar sort of working practice and culture where the ad hoc questions are sort of a bit more forthcoming?
We do this within our team. So we used to do that all the time in the office. We'd have an impromptu discussion when we was talking about a particular topic that had been out in the news or something like that. And we hadn't done it for a really long time. And actually, it was something that people were missing. So we've recently started doing it over the last couple of months. We've got a team group chat, and every now and then, if there's something topical, we'll either call the group chat, but we'll tend to send a message first and say, is everybody free, to help manage it slightly. But without the impromptu video calls, one thing you can do is have that instant messenger, so the team groups, because I think it's that ongoing communication that people are missing, because it feels very different to have to pick up the phone and call someone when usually you'd just shout across to them across the desks. Whereas if you've got that ongoing instant messenger chat, it feels a bit more natural, I think, and people bounce off of each other. But I don't think there's anything wrong with having these impromptu video calls. I think they're great for collaboration. But you just got to be mindful that you don't know what other people are doing at that time and whether they're free. And so maybe just putting a time in for 15 minutes time or half an hour's time, it can help manage that.
That dovetails nicely into one of the other questions I had, which was actually picking up on one of the points that came out of the poll. And I think it was the second most popular concern was around sort of this learning by osmosis and peer-to-peer learning. And certainly as a firm, that's one of the things that we've been incredibly concerned about, particularly with all the new trainees starting who've never worked in an office environment, have never done anything like this job before. A lot of that learning comes from someone just standing over your shoulder or just overhearing what other people are saying. And you know, and this can last for a certain amount of time, but once you've got sort of lots of new intake coming in, I think it starts to notice a bit. So how can employers manage, perhaps the loss of skills that has happened over the last sort of 16 months from not being able to learn by osmosis, and encouraging other ways of trying to mimic that going forward in a more remote setting?
So, I mean, learning by osmosis, I think, really comes down to luck. It very much depends on who that person ends up sat next to within the office. It can be beneficial and it can work really well. But alternatively, if an employee is sat next to somebody or working with somebody that's actually become disengaged over the years, that opportunity for them to learn won't be as positive as it could be. So it could be a bit of a blessing in disguise. It could be an opportunity for employers to make a positive change, to reassess their learning process, to put something in place that's a little bit more structured, that can help people learn better over time. I think working from home, people are much more likely to actually research things themselves and use their own initiative. In the office, it's almost a little bit too easy to ask a question and get a quick answer rather than really think about it and look into it yourself. So it can be a good opportunity to inspire that creative thinking. But for on-the-job learning that really needs that, shadowing or one-to-one management training, obviously with things opening back up and us looking at hybrid, there's still that opportunity there as well.
Yeah, definitely. Somebody here has commented that they when everyone was working from home, they used to have a Teams call at the beginning of the day at 8:30, which everyone would sort of log into. But obviously, as they move more towards a hybrid model, some people are going to be likely to be travelling around that time. And how can they resolve these sorts of issues with some people being in the office and some people being at home? And that might sort of vary between different departments. And, how can they sort of better synchronise what everybody's doing, I suppose?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not only the fact that they might not be physically in the office present when that call or that meeting happens, but if you've got 3 people in the office and the rest of everyone else is at home and you try and have this call, the people in the office, you're probably going to get feedback from their microphones, from them talking on Zoom. You'll be hearing each other, and it becomes a logistical nightmare as well, not only just whether they're actually present or not. So I think it's about, Jess said it earlier, so if you've got a team call, it could be set for later on in the day if that's possible. And the first thing they do when they go into the office is they go into the meeting room together and they join that call or they join that meeting together. So there isn't that logistical nightmare, and that everyone still was able to join that meeting. I think it's going to be there will be teething problems. We can't sit here and say that you're going to be able to fix everything before it happens. But it might be that the call isn't every morning. It might be that it's every other morning. When people are back into the office and they are collaborating more, you might not need it every day. But I think it's one of those things that time will tell, and it is going to have to be a case of wait and see for some of those elements to be able to see if they're working still in a hybrid way.
I think hybrid meetings are a real challenge, because there is a tendency, I think, for the 3 people in the room, as opposed to the 3 individual people at home, to just break off in little side conversations, a bit quietly, and the others can't hear. It's a bit like, you know, when you've got everyone in the office and you're working from home because you're sick, and so you dial in the old days. You know, no one really listened to you that much because they can't hear you quite properly, and it was all a bit crackly, and so you kind of felt disengaged from it. I think there is that danger, and I know one of my clients, they've created lots of individual booths to stop this feedback, so that if there's a hybrid meeting, actually everyone in the office goes to this individual booth, so it's as if you're all dialing in from home, so you're all kind of on the same footing, rather than there being this huddle of people in a room talking to people individually on a screen. And I thought that was quite a good,
that is a good idea
actually. Because actually what I've found with online meetings is that they're much more productive. Everyone gets straight to the point. You tend to have more of an agenda. Somebody will actually have to chair the meeting properly. You know, I'm talking about internal meetings here, but somebody will have to chair it to make sure everyone gets an opportunity to speak, and everyone's just a bit more polite, and it's just all a bit more orderly. And I'd quite like to see that continue back to either face-to-face meetings or hybrid meetings. So I think you know, hybrid meetings, hybrid collaboration, hybrid peer-to-peer learning just needs to happen in a slightly more structured, orderly way, probably. So I mean, generally speaking, then, I mean, you know, obviously well-being is the thing of the moment. Is what everybody has really benefited from, you know, in terms of the whole sort of working from home, hybrid working. I mean, what should a company change, generally speaking, about their whole sort of approach to employee well-being as a result of this whole pandemic?
I would say that very much depends on where you are at the moment as an employer. So what do employees think of the wellbeing plan that's in place at the moment? Do employees feel looked after? Do they feel supported? What additional support do they feel that they need now that they're working remotely some of the time? So once you know your current position, on exactly what your employees want, then you're going to be in a place to update your plan accordingly. I think it's really all about the feedback and input from staff, so that, like we mentioned earlier, you can really tailor it to suit your workforce. So I mean, it is important as well when you're reviewing your current approach to wellbeing, to remember that it's more than just mental wellbeing. There's other aspects to it. There's physical, social, financial, spiritual, and intellectual wellbeing that needs to be considered too.
Yeah, I think feedback's essential. Is it regular feedback, making sure that employees felt listened to, and then making sure, obviously, that you follow through with some of the suggestions and the things that they voice, and I believe you're able to facilitate some of these sort of online feedback sessions and questionnaires.
Yeah, we can. So we've been working with a lot of clients recently, over the last couple of months, when it started to be more likely that the end was in sight. We've been working with them on how to structure their hybrid working practices, and part of that is wellbeing. We think it's a really important part, because, you know, people have been talking about well-being so much over the last 12 to 18 months, and I think it's not any more important now than it was, but it's now recognised, and employees are expecting it, and candidates, when they're looking at future employers, they're expecting it to be a priority as well. And so we think that actually you can't have a hybrid working policy that works really smoothly unless you do consider everyone's well-being at the same time. So we've been working with clients to find out exactly what their employees are looking for, what would work for them, what they need to consider to be able to make it run smoothly. We've been training managers on managing remotely, because, like I said at the beginning, it's so different to managing face-to-face and when someone's physically in the office. And we've been doing this wellbeing piece as well. And we've been talking to clients about it, because there's so much more to consider than just putting in a policy. And it sounds like such a simple thing to do, but it could go very wrong, unfortunately. But yeah, so that's what we've been doing a lot of.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Well, we don't have any more audience questions, and I'm all out of questions as well. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us. Obviously, if anyone in the audience listening has any challenges around hybrid working, please do get in touch with either Amy or Jessica, and I'm sure they will be able to help you. Also, do have a look at our coronavirus hub on our website. It's packed full of really useful content relevant to all the sort of various different business challenges that businesses have been experiencing during the pandemic. Again, yeah, we will be circulating slides to everybody, along with a few top tips that have come out of today. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody, and you've all just got 8 minutes back in your diary. Right, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks.